On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, telecom manufacturer Huawei in the crossfire in the U.S. China trade war. Huawei's chief security officer explains how they are coping. And Theresa May is set to resign. Can another prime minister guide the UK to Brexit?
To serve the country I love. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN in Beijing. We begin with the latest on the fallout from the U.S. ban on Chinese telecom giant Huawei. Just days after Washington put Chinese company Huawei on a trade blacklist, its founder and CEO sat down for a rare interview with the Chinese media, offering his stance on the current state of affairs and his outlook on the company's future. As a pioneer in 5G networks, Huawei's market is getting bigger. It signed 31 deals with telecom operators worldwide and shipped more than 10,000 base stations to overseas markets. But its rising profile also makes it a high-value target in the U.S. China trade dispute. On Thursday, President Donald Trump from the U.S. even said there was, quote, a good possibility Washington would reach an agreement with Beijing, and that's possible that Huawei will be included in a trade deal. Well, that is, if you believe him. So, which is it, bargaining chip or national security threat? How does Huawei plan to deal with the crisis? To find out more, I will talk to the company's Chief Security Officer, Andy Purdy, in an exclusive interview right after this. For more on that, we are joined by Andy Purdy, the Huawei Chief Security Officer in the United States. What do you make of the latest development, both the executive order issued by the United States White House and also the Commerce Department so-called entity list? What does it mean for Huawei?
Well, this has been part of an ongoing effort of nearly 18 months where the United States has started putting pressure on Huawei, beginning with pressure on our mobile carriers not to carry Huawei phones. This is part of the larger geopolitical dynamic going on now between China and the U.S. You see it most visibly in terms of the trade talks, but there's a great global competition. In addition, the United States does not feel secure in cyberspace, and so Huawei is kind of in the middle between a number of these different sources, and some of these geopolitical dynamics mean that the kinds of individuals in government who would normally talk with us are not really open to talking with us to help address real cybersecurity issues.
Several days ago, when you were doing an interview, I quote here, "We hope that we will be given the opportunity to talk to the U.S. government about what kind of risk mitigation measures that can be put in place that will make America safer and allow us to do business and maintain the jobs of our customers." That's a quote coming from you several days earlier. Now, did you have that opportunity now to talk to relevant department of the U.S. government, particularly after the executive order and the entity list?
Well, we are pursuing those conversations. We're aware of some of the comments by the Treasury Secretary and the Commerce Secretary that they may be able to find a way to allow our Tier 3 rural customers to be allowed to retain Huawei products, and the comments by the Commerce Secretary that they would be open to having discussions with us about effective risk mitigation measures. So we are pursuing those conversations to find the right people within government to have the right conversations with.
Usually, what kind of people you are pursuing now? Are they willing to talk to you?
Well, we don't know for sure yet. We are optimistic that they will be willing to discuss these very important issues. We recognize that some of our customers who rely on Huawei products and services and some of our suppliers who are affected by the executive order in one case and the entity list in the other have a very strong interest in working out the situation with the U.S. government so that Huawei can continue to do business and that Huawei can continue to support our customers and to continue to spend the approximately $11 billion per year we spend to buy components, high-end components from U.S. companies. These are interests that matter, so we hope the U.S. government will be willing to talk with us. We expect that they'll be talking with our customers and our suppliers as well, and we think this is a good thing.
The Commerce Department has about 150 days to figure out what's being said specifically in the executive order, particularly regarding so-called foreign adversaries. What does this time period mean for Huawei and your customers and your suppliers?
These are complex, difficult issues that just, you can't wave a magic wand and have them resolved overnight. So this 150 days gives us time to explore these conversations, to explore what the real cybersecurity risks are, and what kinds of measures that can be put in place to provide assurance and transparency.
And yet there are reports coming out suggesting, for example, those are using Huawei smartphones will have difficulties downloading YouTube and many other apps as a result of Google currently interrupting its cooperation with Huawei as we speak. So what would that mean for your customers and those users of Huawei smartphones, as well as specific hardwares of Huawei?
Well, our customers have assurance that the various security updates that normally flow from the Android operating system from Google will continue to be maintained for the benefit of our customers. For the new devices, the next generation of devices that come out later this year, our users will have to, if it's not resolved, and we hope to be able to resolve it with the United States government and with Google, that they will have to then go to an app store to download the app so that they can take advantage of the Google apps that are currently preloaded on Huawei devices. So in the end, we believe that the services that are necessary for our phones, our mobile devices to serve our customers, those will be maintained and the quality will be maintained. You know, we have no question about that.
So how much danger do you think is there that the worst case scenario, as you mentioned earlier, likely to happen?
The worst case scenario is not really very bad for Huawei. The worst case scenario may be more harmful for the global community that may lose out on the potential innovation that we can contribute, and particularly the competition that's so necessary to the world, not just in terms of price, which people talk about, but in terms of innovation. That you need the competition for innovation, and you need diversity of suppliers for the major communication networks of the world to help promote not just risk management, but help promote resilience to make sure these networks can keep operating in a 5G world.
Ren Zhengfei, the founder of Huawei, earlier in an exclusive interview with Chinese media, talking about Huawei be able to lead for at least 2 to 3 years 5G development. But many wonder, with the latest executive order and also the entity list, what does it mean for Huawei to provide these services? Well,
the global community has done a tremendous job in developing the standards necessary for 5G, with the evolution from 4G to 5G, to make sure there's not only maintenance of security, but there are enhanced security features for 5G. We hope, though, that the global community emphasis on almost a globalization of R&D and innovation, that all the countries of the world can benefit from the various innovations that take place around the world. We hope there won't be any kind of a balkanization that will require different parts of the world to create R&D on their own separate track. So we hope that kind of globalization of R&D, that globalization of innovation.
Here are some I have quoted coming from various reports talking about 5G things. IEEE, IETF, ISO, ETSI, 3GPP, TIA, GSMA, ITU. All of these are standards being used in different parts of the world. Are they also the standards that Huawei 5G system is looking at?
We are part of the cyberspace community in telecommunications that is working together to develop a framework of standards. 3GPP is perhaps the most prominent, a coalition of 7 standards bodies. And so you take, for example, the recent comments by the chief executive of Ericsson, who said this ecosystem has created a set of standards that's going to appropriately manage the risk from 5G that's going to benefit everyone.
What can Huawei do to dismiss or to listen the concerns coming from Washington?
President Reagan, back in the day of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, talked about a trust but verify approach for nuclear weapons. The fact is that the global community needs trust through verification. Everybody's products and services need to be independently verified, pursuant to international standards. That's how you address national security risk. That's how you address real risk. And we have participated in that effort, and we continue to call for the global community to continue making progress toward unified standards that you can assess all products and services on.
There were two meetings taking place in reference to that. One was in Prague. Of course, that was quite a controversial meeting. Whether Huawei has much role in discussing is a big question mark. Secondly, of course, it's just taking place. OECD countries try to come up with some kind of standards regarding artificial intelligence. Those are only some of the very recent cases that we could have our eyes on. Mr. Purdy, how far are we really coming from the potential wonderful situation you just described, a so-called unified standard?
You can't just assume that when a product comes from a country that hosts a particular company, you can't assume that a company is bad or the product is bad. You can't assume that a company or product is good. The threats in cyberspace are so real. We have to have effective and transparent mechanisms to assess and reduce the risk. We believe the global community coming out of the Prague proposals, we believe the work that Germany is doing, and we expect the European Union to do some as well, that hopefully they're going to come up with some measures that are objective and transparent so we have a basis for knowing which products and services are worthy of trust.
I see. Now, Mr. Purdy, you're an American citizen, right?
Yes.
You used to work for the Department of Homeland Security and also work as a former prosecutor. What is it like for you now to work for Huawei in Washington under the current political climate? Is Huawei still going to be a company attractive to you and your American co-workers that are now on the staff?
One of the things that I found has been such a great experience with Huawei, I was recruited by our global head of cybersecurity and privacy nearly 7 years ago with a vision of the transformation of a great company from a cybersecurity and privacy perspective. A transformation to be an advocate for a safer cyberspace. So I've had the opportunity traveling to 23 countries on behalf of Huawei. And discussions with governments and private companies around the world and within the United States to be an advocate for making America safer in cyberspace. So no one has told me anything to say that I don't agree with. I get to say what I want to say. I get to tell the truth about real cybersecurity risk. And the fact is, the United States and the other countries of the world need to raise the bar. We need to take these measures to develop and use uniform cybersecurity standards. Use these mechanisms to assess risk objectively and based on evidence so that we can have conformance programs so we can prove which products are worthy of trust. That's how we address the risk. That's how we are all safer in cyberspace.
What's going on with Huawei in America? I understand more than 50 factories have been moved to the other countries. So what is the mission of Huawei America now?
We have 1,500 employees in the United States. We have our carrier, enterprise, and mobile device business here. On the long term, we would like to be able to participate actively in business in the United States. We believe that at some point, hopefully sooner than that, when the United States has programs in place to really address real cybersecurity risks, the kinds of requirements that are necessary, the kinds of proof programs, we'll be able to participate. We hope we'll be able to participate sooner, and particularly we want to help maintain our 40 or so rural wireless providers, the Tier 3 providers, who serve rural America. They have been loyal to us. We want to be loyal to them. We provide equipment and service that they can't get from anybody else, serving farmers and small business and schools and drugstores and the communities of rural America. We want to be able to maintain that service, and we know we can do it in a way where the risk is addressed. We know that Nokia and Ericsson, with heavy presences in China, they operate under risk mitigation agreements overseen by the U.S. government. We want to talk with the U.S. government about such proven risk mitigation mechanisms so the United States can benefit from Huawei innovation and technology and us being a competitor to help keep down prices.
And my last question, Mr. Purdy, Ren Zhengfei in a recent interview talked about he would even provide his relatives a gift such as Apple phone when they are traveling to the United States. Mr. Purdy, I wonder what kind of phone are you using?
P30 Pro, the best phone in the world. It's a Huawei phone. I encourage everyone to consider it, and you can buy it online and serviced by some of the major providers.
Advertising time. Thank you so much, Mr. Purdy, the Chief Security Officer of Huawei America. Really appreciate it. All the best, sir. I mean it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. After our exclusive interview with the Chief Security Officer of Huawei America, we're also joined by two important guests here in the studio. First of all, Mr. Andy Yan, who's founder and managing partner of SAP Partners. He is one of the most well-known investors here in China. Good to see you, Andy.
Thank you. Good to see you here.
And also wonderful to see Alan Beebe, President of AmCham China. Good to see you.
Always wonderful to be here.
Gentlemen, a very important topic. Are business communities becoming bargaining chips? Or are you really the stabilizing factors of the bilateral relations between China and the United States? Alan, I have to go to you first.
Well, certainly historically, the U.S. business community and the U.S. China economic relationship has been the important ballast in the relationship, but clearly it's less stable and less predictable now. I wouldn't say that we're a bargaining chip. In fact, I think generally speaking, our business community has felt that China has showed restraint in retaliating against American companies. We do see an uptick in some non-tariff barrier actions, slower customs clearance, inspections, and so on. But overall, China has showed restraint.
Okay, what do you think, Andy?
Well,
Huawei, for example, is a Chinese company.
Yes, it's one of the most prominent Chinese company, not only in China but also in the world. And I think it is very unfortunate as of today. The business community, to a great extent, become part of the U.S. China trade negotiation, and it is part of the bargaining chip. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. But as it goes in the current stage, it has become a part and a very important part of the bilateral negotiation.
Therefore, I have to go to you. The business communities should have their voices heard to the politicians and also to the rest of the country, probably the rest of the world as well. Alan, I know members of your AmCham in China have spoken out in a latest survey about tariffs. What do they say?
Well, first is that over the past year, we've periodically polled our members to understand how the tariffs are impacting them. And the position is very clear that our members do not support tariffs, and AmCham does not support tariffs. But as it relates to this latest escalation from 10% to 25% up to the $200 billion, it's clearly having an impact.
Having an impact of how big, and do they feel already?
Yeah, so, well, it's playing out in different ways, and it depends on the sector. But in terms of companies that are reconsidering their manufacturing footprints, their supply chains in China, there's an uptick in those companies diversifying their supply chains and really mitigating risk. Something like 40% of the companies that we've surveyed have indicated that they're really taking those actions. I would say anecdotally as well is that certainly large corporations, they've been in a way preparing for this in terms of scenario planning. thinking about what would the worst case be, and they're taking action.
Right, they're taking action, but I guess out of pain in a way, because they've been here in this market for a long time. They try to establish as much as possible in this market, and this is going to be the biggest, certainly potential market in the world.
Sure.
So, shying away from this market, having other options, what does it mean to them?
Well, there are ways that savvy companies are working to minimize the pain. And several of those ways are, number one is what they refer to as an in China, for China strategy. So one option is to diversify away from China. The other option is actually to confine your supply chain to China to try and minimize the impact that the tariffs are having. You know, and so in that way, they may not have the cost advantage, but on the other hand, they can still tap into the market.
But this is quite a danger there, isn't it? It's like separating the Chinese market from their other markets. And this is exactly what many people have been against for decades, which is try to artificially, by reasons of politics, to separate markets, separate innovation, and separate businesses.
Well, I think from U.S. perspective, they think this whether or not it's a fair trade policy. And since China joined the WTO in the last almost 20 years, by the WTO rule, China indeed, as a developing country, enjoying lower tariff. That's a commonly agreed upon principles.
Yeah.
Now the question is, after almost 20 years, whether or not China is still a developing country. Should China enjoy the lower tariff? I think if you look
But the tariff war is another thing, isn't it?
That's
the
right.
fair debate is one thing. You could debate about that, and it seems that a lot of opening conversations going that way. But on the other hand, if you take tariff as part of the war, that's certainly another thing. While the other economy also being involved in all of this.
It's going to impact both countries' economy and principally the private sectors.
Particularly.
And not only that, because the Sino-U.S. Economic relationship is so important, it's also going to affect other parts of the world, like the Southeast Asia and Europe.
Indeed. We see a lot of different voices in this discussion. As long as it's a real discussion, it is beneficial. However, when it goes to a trade conflict and trade war, it's not going to benefit anyone. Take a look at how different sides are viewing the trade tensions and its impact. Roberto Azevedo, the Director General of WTO, said the U.S.-China trade war is hurting the global economy and everyone loses unless we find a solution for this. The IMF has just published a blog warning that consumers are unequivocally the losers from trade tensions. And the EU Chamber of Commerce in China also have spoken out. It has done a survey showing the trade dispute between U.S. and China is hurting 1/3 at least of the EU companies operating in China. Very similar to what you have just said, Alan, about your members of AmCham in China. But the question really is, it's not just about trade, it's probably also about the technology as well. Are we going to be separated? That's the issue. Are we going to be so-called departing from one another? Is that the biggest danger facing you, Alan, and your members?
It's certainly a major question. What does decoupling mean? What does separation mean? And we have, over the last 20 or 30 years, built a globally integrated economy. So I think to separate I guess everything is possible, but it's certainly not easy. So I think it's going to take really sort of wise decision making on behalf of both governments to really determine, what are the true sort of national, why would we be decoupling? Why would we be separating? And if there's true national security concerns, then I think both governments are going to need to come together to figure that out.
Yeah, but the biggest danger is in mixing national security issues with real business issues.
Absolutely.
Then manipulation could happen in any case at any time, isn't it, Andy?
It is true, but see, technology has been developing to a stage that it's hard to separate totally the economic matters from national security matters. For example, especially in the mobile internet age, right? But the problem is that the world economy is so integrated into each other, and the technology is really become a world product. So, for example, in the 5G period of time, there's so many inter-patent, right? You license my patent, I license yours.
Yes.
Huawei did this, right? Huawei did it
with various American companies.
American, also Japanese companies
yes,
as well.
Indeed.
Right. So here is the world, right? If you want to separate of those things, first of all, it's going to be very hard. Then, what's going to impact your own world, your own country? It is unknown. It is unknown. Well, China in the past has been greatly benefited from the technology transfers,
yeah.
right? But now China is the second largest world economy. In many areas, China actually has a more advanced business models. And in the biotech side, China has made a great stride and great improvement. So I don't think it is, first of all.
So what's your point? You have to tell us what exactly do you believe? What is that word that you want to come out to share with our audience?
I believe all of the technology development is a accumulation of the all human beings progress, right? Like Newton said,
right.
You make progress because you are standing on the shoulder of the giants.
All right. Andy, Yan, and Alan Beebe, what a pleasure to have both of you on our panel today. We hope your voices, calm and important voices, could be heard by both sides. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Adam, thank you.
And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Theresa May set to resign. Can another Prime Minister guide the UK to Brexit? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. Prime Minister Theresa May from the UK, her premiership is drawing to a close on Friday. The embattled leader announced that she will quit as party leader on June the 7th. May said in the tearful statement that she has done everything she could to convince MPs to back her deal, but it was in vain. Her cabinet was left in tatters following the backlash against her Brexit bill, with prominent Brexiters Andrea Leadsom quitting government on Wednesday. Bruised from 3 years of agonizing negotiation over UK's departure from the EU, May eventually failed to stem the tides of opposition from the cabinet. The question now is whether her successor will be able to succeed where she failed, with the rising possibility of a no-deal Brexit back on the negotiation table.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
For Theresa May's resignation, we are joined in London. Ian Begg, a professor at the European Institute and co-director of the Darendorf Forum of the London School of Economics and Political Science. In Brussels, we have Fraser Cameron, senior advisor at the European Policy Centre. Good to have both of you, gentlemen. I do not want to become emotional as the Prime Minister was in that beautiful quote. The most important thing is what's going to be the fate of the UK, its economy, and that of the EU. Let me go to you first, Professor, about that. What do you think will be the next few steps of political drama?
Well, it's quite clearly prescribed in the way the Conservative Party chooses its leader. First, the members of Parliament will whittle down the very long list of potential contenders to two who they'll put forward to the membership of the Conservative Party, which counts around 100,000 people, and the membership will decide which of those two becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party. Now, you notice I choose my words very carefully here, leader of the Conservative Party, because whoever is then given that position will have to assemble a majority in the House of Commons to become Prime Minister. And let's not forget the Conservative Party at the moment is a minority government relying on the votes of the Democratic Ulster Unionist Party to stay in power. So it's perfectly conceivable that a new leader of the Conservatives will be appointed and yet not be able to become Prime Minister.
What would that mean? All this drama, well, it's evolving, Mr. Cameron, for the EU and its relationship with the UK, which is becoming ever more trickier.
Well, they're getting more and more fed up, frankly. They've given the UK another extension, and now they're whittling away the time to engage in a change of leadership, which is not really going to change very much in UK politics. It won't change the other arithmetic in the British Parliament, and it certainly won't change the attitude of the EU. So, frankly, people here think it's just a waste of time.
But it's going to continue, I'm afraid, Professor Beck, even it is a waste of time. So what is it that would be able to bring consensus together? Do you see any hope, Professor Beck?
Well, the only thing that will enable the British collectively to make a decision on Brexit is cross-party agreement between the two leading parties, with some of the other parties contributing to that. There's been an attempt to do that over the last few weeks. It's failed, partly because of Theresa May's stubbornness, partly because the Labour Party still sniffs the possibility of having a general election as the outcome, rather than resolving the Brexit question. So we're in this rather bizarre world in which party politics is dominating the need to resolve the Brexit question. For the time being, I don't see that stopping. It's going to continue over the summer. We'll probably get to another cliff edge towards the end of October, which we know is the current deadline. And unfortunately, there's no easy way out of this, whoever the leader is, just as Fraser said.
Party politics is hijacking the national interest as we speak inside the UK right now. However, what is even more important is not just about the UK itself, but rather also what's going on in the rest of the world. There's the China-US trade consultations, if we can still use that word. There's also the US trade discussions, we could use it diplomatically, with the other economies, the EU's economy included. The UK, at this moment, is still part of it. And also there will be many other issues about WTO reforms and everything that all needs a strong voice, whether it's come from the EU or from the UK. So, Professor Begg, will the UK handicapped already, in a way, handicapped rather, in any global responsibility?
The UK eventually will find a way out of the Brexit dilemma. Unfortunately, at the moment, all options, even 3 years after nearly 3 years after the referendum, are still on the table, from not leaving at all to the complete hard Brexit, where the UK would trade only on WTO terms, and everything in between. At some stage, when I can't exactly predict, but at some stage that will be resolved. But until then, the UK is going to be punching well beneath its weight in international relations, because everybody will look at the UK and say, well, until you sort yourself out, we're not going to listen to you.
At some stage, eventually, those are beautifully selected words and exact words coming from Professor Begg to describe what the UK's role might be. So, Mr. Cameron, will the EU be able to play a bigger role, even though you have one absence, important absence coming from the UK? Parliament just going through election season. Do you see any good signs? I mean, good signs, of course, up to interpretation.
Yeah, there's a number of good signs. Firstly, no other country is contemplating leaving the EU. You've seen the chaos of Brexit, and it's, I think, been a strong warning to other countries. Secondly, I think the populists have peaked. I don't think they'll certainly get a number of seats in the European Parliament more than last time, but they're certainly not going to threaten the overall pro-European centrist groupings, including the centre-right People's Party, the Socialists, the Liberals, the Greens, etc. So the European Parliament will still continue to function, although there will be some noisy elements in it, including for a time perhaps from the Brexit party in the UK. But overall, the EU, certainly on the trade front, is doing pretty well at the moment.
Mr. Cameron, on the other hand, what about some of the issues I just mentioned regarding trade, whether it's what's going on between China and the U.S. and the rest of the world, because this is a very important year for trade, and this is a critical juncture. What's likely to be EU's role without the UK participation? And also, the UK's so-called Brexit issue, how much will it bring some thoughts and reflections to the EU in its future policy choices regarding trade, regarding partnerships?
Well, firstly, the EU over the last couple of years has secured some of the biggest trade deals in the history of the WTO. The trade deal with Japan earlier this year is the biggest one in the last 25 years. There's been deals with Canada, with Singapore, others with Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Vietnam in the pipeline. So it's a good record. What's changing now, of course, is because of the impact of Trump and the collateral effect of the U.S. China trade war, the EU is having to take new look at trade defense measures, and that's what it's doing right now. So I think the next Commission, you'll see a tougher approach overall in trade vis-a-vis some of the other big trading partners.
Interesting. Professor Beck, your thought also on this issue, particularly regarding the absence of the UK.
Well, I think we can exaggerate the impact of the absence of the UK. If you look at the economic weight of the UK within the European Union, it's under 15%. So that still means that the Germans, the French, the Italians and the Spaniards and so on are the dominant weight within Europe and able to set much of the agenda. What may be lost to Europe is the bridge, if we can call it that, between the two Anglo-Saxon countries, the United States and the UK. Sometimes the UK is portrayed as being mid-Atlantic and helps to navigate what Europe wants with the difficulties of Washington. It's also a year of renewal in the European Union. We're going to see new leadership coming into the European Commission and the European Council. As you've mentioned in your introduction, a new European Parliament being elected this week. It will still be the same kind of political mix with a slight shift towards the populists. But I think there's a renewal of EU business that will take place, and new people will be setting the agenda.
Mr. Cameron, I mean, now many say it's a critical juncture. That's not an exaggeration. There's topics about standards. There's topics about the systems. There's also topics about how to form partnerships, based on what to form partnerships. And there's also talks about whether to decouple certain economies or not. What do you think now, particularly when you have a thing going on the European continent about Brexit? You see the effect of nationalism, you see the effect of different views about globalization, you see the effect of political manipulation of trade and also political decisions. Do you think people would take that as a serious matter and more serious than they used to be, and less vulnerable to emotions and rhetorics? Mr. Cameron.
Well, all politicians, I think, have recognized...
Yeah, I know politicians will do that, but what about the public? You know, that's a different thing. And also the business community as well.
Yeah, but what is the public? The public split. There's no one view. You've got, you know, people who have been, unfortunately, left behind as a result of globalization. Politicians have failed, I think, to deal with that. So that's one thing that's now on the agenda, how to deal with those left behind in different countries. And that's not just in Europe, it's in the US and other countries of the world too. But secondly, I think there's a commitment of the EU, along with several like-minded countries, to try and defend the rules-based international order that we've achieved over the last 25 years. I mean, it's under threat, particularly from the United States. But if we go back to the 1930s, when it's a free-for-all, then it's not going to be a very pleasant world.
Interesting views there. And Professor Begg also now, the roles of Germany and France will more likely to be paid attention to by the rest of the world within the European continent. Meanwhile, what do you think will be the role of the UK vis-à-vis these two economies in many of the discussions that we mentioned earlier? Professor Begg.
Well, Germany has been quite supportive of the UK during this process, but what's happened is that France has become more and more alienated. We've seen President Macron a number of times saying he's fed up with the Brits, he wants to get on with Brexit. So there is a bit of a cleavage between France and the UK on international dimension of things. But nevertheless, the UK is a European country, has European values. It continues to subscribe to the same sorts of things that Fraser just mentioned, the interest in multilateralism, the interest in maintaining a global rules-based system. So I think that you'll find that although the UK may be divorcing eventually, who knows, from the European Union, it will still support the broad thrust of those EU-related policies.
Before we go, final words, very briefly, a sentence or two from both of you. What can we expect immediately after this? Go ahead, Mr. Cameron.
We can expect probably a hardline Brexiteer becoming Prime Minister, going to Brussels, finding he's not going to be able to get a deal, then having to go back to try and tell his party, we need to actually change, and then you're back to square one again. So it remains a difficult job, whoever takes the job, to try and tell the truth to the British people and to the Conservative Party about the realities of European politics.
Professor Begg.
I think Fraser is maybe being a bit too pessimistic here. I think that the Conservative Party is going to have to come to its senses and appoint somebody who is able to consolidate the middle and maybe reach across the party divide. Let me, for once, be quite optimistic on this.
Ian Begg, Fraser Cameron, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on this very important topic. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Have a great weekend, everyone.